Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Mary Beth Osowski. So I had to make sure that I got that pronounced right. Great to see you, Mary Beth.
Good to see you. I'll see you, be here. I'm just thrilled to be able to come and talk about adoption.
Yeah. So Mary Beth has got, husband they've got 7 kids. So there's 4 bio kids who are grown up. I'm looking at my notes from last time. At 55, my memory is such that I do need to make notes. I don't have this recollection. 2 kids that were adopted internationally from China, and you've also got who are 18, I think, if I can read my notes correctly. And then you've also got, is it a son who was adopted from foster care who's 19? Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. And the 2 from China, one is 18 and one is 14.
One is 18 and 14. Okay. So, and you're also involved in, you've got this nonprofit called 13 Million Orphans.
Well, it's actually called Be the One. The 13 Million Orphans is kind of a tagline from my Gmail because the name Be the One was taken. But when I was originally looking into how many orphans there were, and this was 10 years ago, the number of true orphans was listed somewhere between 13 and 17 million. So that's kind of how I grasped that number. It's much higher now, but
wow,
that's what it was originally.
It's a huge number, isn't it? It's a huge number.
Yes.
So let's dive right in. So what comes to your mind when you hear this phrase, thriving adoptees, Mary Beth?
Well, I've really been thinking a lot about this, both since the last time we talked and just over the years from adoption. And initially my thought was, and I even asked some of my adopted kids, do you see yourself, or do you see adoption as a one-time event in your life? Or does it more define who you are? And I think they had a little trouble answering that question, because I don't know that any adoptee can actually see adoption as a one-time event, like a birth or a marriage. So then I started kind of thinking a little differently about it, and I kind of came up with the idea, I think those that thrive tend to see adoption as a gift or something they've received. And those that struggle, I really think they see adoption as representing something that was taken away from them or something they lost. And so I know when we talked before, we kind of talked about this doorway, that some people seem to be stuck on one side of the doorway and others can walk through that doorway and kind of move on with their lives and connect with people. And so that's kind of how I see the thriving adoptee as someone who's able to walk through that doorway and accept where they are.
Yeah. Fascinating. I really struggled with English literature at school, right? And and language. And when I say struggled, I was kind of okay, but they were my worst subject. So, here in the UK, we do exams, national exams when we're 16. Mm-hmm. And I got 3 A's, 5 B's, and 2 C's. And my C's were Englishes, both the Englishes, English language and English literature. And that's a long way to get around to say the point that I really didn't get Shakespeare at all. However, I've heard something very profound that he said, and it's strange for me to quote that, given that English literature wasn't a strength of mine, right? And he said something like, "Nothing has any meaning, good or bad, other than the one we give it." Something along those lines. So it's all about perception. Yes. How we perceive something determines how we feel about it.
Yes, that is so true. And I was thinking, the other thing I think that adoptees struggle with is who to identify with. So when you say perception, for so long, I think my child who's been struggling has always tried to identify with the birth family and kind of reconcile how I can get back there. How can I be maybe more like them, even though he didn't have a good understanding, I think, of who they were, other than it was a very chaotic, rocky beginning. And then, if you choose to identify with your adoptive family, I think you're more able just to kind of take things as they come instead of continually looking at things through your birth lens. Maybe that would be a way to put it.
Yeah. Wow. This is fascinating stuff, isn't it? I think for me, I would split the two things down there, the meaning and the identity stuff. I would separate them out. However, I think the most salient, well, you said something about choose and identifying with the boy, identifying with the birth family,
Mm-hmm.
and you said that was a choice. To me, that it doesn't sound like a choice to me. It doesn't sound like a conscious choice. Whether it sounds something like it feels like something that's deeper to me. It's a subconscious decision rather than a conscious one.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, it's all tangled up into just feelings, emotions they have. And I think maybe the older you get, the more able you are to kind of train your mind. Like, okay, this thought or this feeling is grounded in something in my past, and I'm either going to choose to think about it and to make decisions from that, or I'm going to hop over to where I think I need to be and make decisions based on what I know instead of what I'm feeling or thinking. So yeah, I think a lot of it is unconscious, but I think as with so many other things, we have to train our mind. We talked about insecurities before, and everybody's insecure, and you get ready to start a new job or something, and you think, your thoughts that come into my mind, I don't know that I can do this, or I'm not sure that I'm good at this. And you have to purposely or purposefully go and say, you know what, I do have the training to do this, or I do have the experiences in my past to do this. And I think it is a constant trying to retrain how you're thinking and feeling in some respects.
Yeah. Oh, wow. There's so many different ways I could go from there, Mary Beth.
One thought that comes to mind, and I don't know if this is your thinking. I have one of my daughters is dyslexic, and I had read a wonderful book called The Gift of Dyslexia, and it was about a man who was dyslexic, and he talked about how the dyslexic mind actually worked, gosh, I don't know, like 300 times faster or something than the normal mind, and it sees pictures from all different angles. And that the way to get a dyslexic child to learn how to read, or put numbers and letters in the right order, is you train them to look at things from a certain viewpoint of their mind. Instead of letting their mind just jump all over the place, you give them a picture. I think it was called the mind's eye. And you say, okay, this is how we're going to view this page just when you're reading, and so kind of that kind of comes to mind to me. That was something that she had to work really hard to try to train her mind to see a page linearly rather than from like a 3D kind of angle.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, from that, it's like the fundamental question to me is how do if a child or a teen or an adult is feeling that it is seeing is associated, is giving being adopted a negative meaning, how do we gently challenge that? How do we empathize and then move it on? Because I talk about this quite a lot on the podcast. Like a coach moves you on. There's a gentle, one of my mentors calls it a loving disruption, right? So we create empathy for the conversation by seeking to understand how our child is feeling. We validate that, and then we gently we move it on. We open it up so that they can start to see that there may be another meaning.
Yes.
That's kind of more.
I think what you're talking about is acknowledging the wound that is there, and as adoptive parents, I think you'd like to do that maybe 10 times, maybe 20 times, and at some point, you want to say, let's move on. But I think maybe in any situation where those feelings and emotions come up, it's helpful to once again acknowledge the wound. I understand this hurts. I understand maybe you feel rejection. I understand it's hard for you to trust me, and it doesn't have to be a long drawn out conversation, but I think you do need to acknowledge the wounds there, and that it might always be there for some people. But then in the same conversation, you can say, but look how far you've come. Maybe look what you've done so far. Look at the talents that God has given you. Look at the opportunities that you have now, and let's set some goals and try to reach those goals. But I think you always have to acknowledge the wound, and then like you say, just slowly move on from there, because you can't stay stuck in that wound. Does that make sense?
You talked earlier on about us all being insecure, and I think and I think you're spot on. I think you're totally right. I think that to be human is to feel insecure.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering what you've learned in terms of, because I've done a lot of work with kids and sharing my vulnerability about when I've felt insecure, or when I felt railroaded or bullied, especially bullied. That has been very that has landed well with them, because I get the impression that not many adults tell them how they feel. So if you can relate to, so particularly around this bullying thing, I talked about being bullied when I was their age and how I'd felt about that. And that seemed to establish a real bridge of an empathy bridge for the conversation, because they knew that how I got I got how they felt.
Yes.
I gave, and I'm wondering what role vulnerability plays about our own emotions as an adopted parent. And I'm in your camp now, and I'm in the listeners' camp, right? I'm wondering what role vulnerability plays about what vulnerability about our own feelings. What role does that have to play with our kids when we're talking to them about their feelings?
Well, I think it's very important that, yeah, you do share maybe things that have gone on in your past as a way to let them know that they're not the only ones in that particular situation. But I think we also have to be careful in not making it more about us. You can say, yes, I had a rotten childhood as well, but look at what I've done. I've just forgotten about it. Again, you have to, empathy can start with, I've been in your shoes somewhat, but then you have to, again, let them express, how that feels to them, or give them some, concrete things that they can do to help them get through the next day, or of bullying, or just feeling insecure about themselves because of something. So both of those, you have to empathize with the feeling, but then you also, yes, have to go forward, and how are we gonna get you to the next step?
Yeah, it's always about that looking forward. So what have you learned about, and what are you continuing to learn about your own approach with this with your kids?
Well, I think, one of the biggest things we talked about, my being a Christian, and really feeling like God has put everyone here for a purpose. And even maybe if you're not a Christian, but I think still a lot of people have that common thing that, yes, there must be, everybody asks, why am I here on this earth? There has to be a purpose. And I think when you kind of focus kids on that, like, yes, a lot of your past has been rocky, or, dealing with my own kids, I think the one we adopted from a Chinese orphanage at the age of 7, the other at the age of 8, one came through foster care. So they all had very tumultuous childhoods, with chaos. And so, yes, those things were bad, but God knew that, and God allowed that, and there's going to be a purpose for it. I believe that God wastes nothing. So even our bad days, our suffering, there's going to be some point in the future where maybe you can strengthen somebody else who has gone through that. Maybe it's to find your character in some way, and God's going to use that for a purpose. So I think first, that's a very important thing to let our kids know, that it's not just wasted time. It's not just something random. It can be used for a purpose, and you do have a purpose in this life. And that's where you get, I think, just your ability to feel good about yourself, and going through your day as, there's a reason I'm here. But I think as parents, adoptive parents, trying to deal with all of that past, I mean, first of all, it's okay not to have the answers. My kids, obviously, we started our adoption journey, gosh, when was it? It's been so long ago. So 15, 16 years ago. And I still, look back and think, oh, did I do that right? Should I have done that differently? What should I be doing now? But you've got to realize that, nobody has all the answers. It's okay not to have the answers. It's okay to have things break down sometimes, and you pick yourself up and you move on. We've, with our one son, we tried so many treatment options with him. And he just still struggles, just never responded to anything. And if I looked at it and said, well, he's 19, we failed, that would be, really hard. But if I say, there's a purpose for his life, there's a purpose, and he may not get it now, and he may not get it when he's 21, but I'm very hopeful, that once he moves through his adult life, that he's going to see that and see his purpose and be able to use it for positive.
Yeah. So the purpose thing, that's both you seeing a purpose and your kids seeing a purpose, right?
Yes. Yeah. I think you have to show them that purpose, we talked about how you make them feel lovable. And I know you've talked about that in past podcasts. So I think when you see your child blooming in an area, or, my son, was interested in music. And so, you get him that first guitar, and you see if he wants lessons, or you give him a book, or, maybe your child's good at art and you sign them up for an art class, or so you try to see those areas that I think God has gifted them in, and let them know this, not everybody can do that. Not everybody can play the guitar. Not everybody can paint a picture. Not everybody can, play soccer or whatever. That's something that you're gifted in. And I think as you share what you see with them, they see it themselves.
Yeah. I came up with this phrase a couple of years ago, and I'm still really proud of it. And it's the phrase is, there's no such thing as a second-hand insight. So meaning we have to see things
ourselves
for themselves. We have to see things ourselves. We have to, from a religious, an insight is a sight from within.
Yes.
The word educate comes from the Latin educare, which is to draw out of people. So that kind of runs counter to the perception, most people's perception in the Western world of education. So education is, the transfer of knowledge from the teacher to the kid, right? So but that's not what educare means. It means to draw out of it. It's to catalyze an insight, to prompt an insight, to get people to see things differently, to cause an epiphany.
I have a favorite quote, Mark Twain, who said, "The only real learning is self-learning."
Yeah,
which is very similar. And this is where what's called the village. I don't know if you have that saying over in England, it takes a village. But this is where that comes in, because you can tell your child something. And I'm a home educator as well, so I can teach my child something, and they don't remember it, but they might tell me a month, 2 months later, "Oh, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so taught me this. Isn't this cool?" And I think, well, I told you that. But sometimes, it takes a number of times, and I think a number of people telling them that, especially when it comes to insecurity. Your parents, yes, can tell you, "You're a wonderful kid. You're smart and you're funny," and it may not have a whole lot of meaning. But if you have maybe a teacher in school, or a friend from church, or a friend's parents, and they say, "Boy, you are really good at helping people, that's wonderful that and it makes such a big difference. And so not only do we as adoptive parents want people to speak into our children, but we have to also remember to speak into other people's children as well, whether they're adopted or not.
Have you got any idea why kids don't take compliments from their parents?
Oh gosh, maybe it's because they see them every day.
Yeah.
And I don't know, they tune some out. But my son would probably say, well, you're my mom, so you're supposed to tell me that. So it doesn't seem quite as genuine because, yeah, I know you love me. Yeah, I know you think I'm great. You tell me that every day. But when somebody you don't see as often says that to you, then maybe it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. The one word that came to my mind and came back to my mind as I was listening to that is that, we know our parents are biased.
Yes. Yes.
Biased. So, have you heard me talking about the question mark versus the exclamation mark? Have you heard me talking about that?
I think I have, but you can refresh my memory.
Yeah. So I heard this a while ago, and I'm going back to how do we get kids to see things for themselves?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same way we get anybody to see things for themselves. And the example I always give for this is like, you've got a sentence. Some sentences end with what you call do you call them full points? A point, like a full stop, the dot at the end of a sentence.
Oh, a period.
A period. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's the word. I don't. So we call them full stops. So a sentence ends with a period, and that's the end of the conversation, isn't it, really? A command ends with an exclamation mark, like don't run in front of that road, and that is an even stronger end to the conversation, to the communication. And then you've got a sentence that you've got a question which ends with a question mark. And I heard this ages ago. I thought it's a lovely metaphor, because a question mark looks a bit like it looks a bit like a hook, doesn't it? And or like a shepherd's staff, that they use for, I'm thinking religious, the three wise men and with the
you guide.
Yeah, and the question mark looks like a hook, and that we use that like when we're hooking a rubber duck, on a fun fair.
Okay.
A fun fair stand where we hook the rubber duck out of the water and we get a prize, right? With that hook, and it works the same with a question to anybody. They have to go within. The question gets the other person that we're talking to go within, to think about their answer to that question. So instead, people say, I've told him till I'm blue in the face. Well, yeah, there's a saying that it like in business, that telling ain't selling. We don't want to hear salespeople tell us stuff, and they list all this stuff, and like we just got overload. Whereas, and that's why we don't like salespeople, because they're they're trying to force some information into our head. Where like a consultative salesperson or a coach or a parent who is coaching will ask a question, and the question gets the child, the team, the other person to think about something for themselves and give their own answer.
Yes, yes. And it's interesting you mentioned the shepherd's crook, because the shepherd's crook, as I understand it, was actually used to yank the sheep back from dangerous places. So if the sheep was getting too near a cliff or brambles
Ah,
or whatever, you would yank them back with the shepherd's crook. And that's such a great point because yeah, trying to draw kids out and get them to talk, especially teenagers,
teenagers, yeah.
about what they think is very difficult. Gosh, I talked till I blue in the face. No, what I'm thinking is I've said this so many times to my kids. I'll ask them a question and I'll say, what do you think? And they'll say, I don't know. And I always say, I didn't ask you what you knew. I asked you what you thought. I want to know your thought process. What is it that you are, trying to figure out, or what is it that you're, what's going on in your brain, basically. So yes, questions are excellent ways to do that. But sometimes it takes a lot more than one question,
Yeah,
especially with a teenager. You've got to, come on, give me a little bit more. What did you mean by that? What do you think of when you hear that? Why is it that this caused you to get angry so quickly? And sometimes, yeah, they don't know what it is. So yeah,
yeah,
I think a lot of questions, a whole string of them sometimes will maybe get them to help process some things that are
yeah.
very difficult for them.
Some things, two things come to mind off the back of that is, and I'm not, me and my wife haven't got a kid, so we're neither parents nor adopted parents. But I know how this stuff goes in terms of questions and how I am about it. And it's always about us, isn't it? We've got more influence over ourselves than we have over others, whoever they are. And what I feel is, as you were saying it, I was thinking, so what stops me asking questions? And it's impatience for me. And I was thinking about, I was thinking about impatience, and I was thinking about time, and I was thinking back to our first conversation, like how do you do it? 7 kids. You've got 7 kids. You've got the nonprofit. You got the nonprofit. It's like time is a real luxury, that we don't always have, and that when I'm feeling time pressured, then that's not when I'm in. That's not when I'm in the right place to be. I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in
Right. Although
rather than
I
giving
think
them space.
yeah, I think sometimes though, when you feel that you're in that sort of situation, that's when you need to say, wait a second, this might be, because things never come at a opportune time. Kids always want to talk when they're going to bed about deep things sometimes. Um, my daughter, who I don't know if I shared, but she has a physical handicap and has had multiple surgeries. And she hasn't had one for a number of years. I'm very thankful for that. But anytime we would start off, like she's going to need a surgery, and I have to do this and this and this to line things up for the surgery. And I got to think about, because we usually travel a long distance for it. And so my mind is filled with these things. And that's usually when she starts to ask either ask questions or, have some sort of behavior that makes you think, oh no, this is going to be a very in-depth conversation. And you want to say, let's talk about this tonight. And you can't. You need to stop right then and talk about it, because that's when they're having those emotions. And it's very important to help them process the emotions when they're having them. And for her, it brought up surgery just brought back so many feelings from her past, that they were very overwhelming. And so, yeah, we tend to get impatient. We want to not have to think about it at that moment, but that's when we have to. And I think that builds trust with kids. We had talked before about building trust with kids. You kind of push them off to the side and say, let's deal with that later. They don't trust to come to you and to discuss things with you.
Yeah, yeah. So we were talking about, I mean, the whole question thing is about them, kids seeing stuff for themselves. And you know, the other question that we talked about, what we're going to talk about, was how do we get kids to see that they are lovable? And as soon as I said see that they're lovable, I think it's about feeling that they're lovable. It's not something in the head. It's probably not even something in the heart. It's something like an embodied feeling.
Right.
It's something deep, feeling deep in our bones. It's not an abstract concept. Oh yeah, I'm lovable. You know, this is why kind of like the affirmation stuff don't work, isn't it? You know, if I'm going away from the parenting space, and I'm going straight into the kind of like self-development, self-improvement space. You know, there's affirmation, and these affirmations are vague, theoretical bumper stickers that have no depth or foundations to them. They're just they mean nothing. They're throwaway lines. So feeling lovable is really, it's feeling lovable. It's an embodied thing. It's an embodied feeling to me.
Right. Well, and I think, yeah, a lot of people think emotions do dictate your thoughts at some level, especially those unconscious feelings that you might not even fully be aware of. But I think it is also just as true that your thoughts dictate your emotions. And when you said help kids see that they're lovable, in a way, that's true, because when you ask them questions that they don't have answers to, I think it's okay to, like you said, gently lead them into a certain direction or a certain conclusion. So if you say, why do you think you got so upset when I mentioned so and so? I don't know. They truly may not know. And you can ask them a few questions to try to explore it. But then at some point, if you have a gut feeling what caused that emotion, I think it's okay to say, I think what maybe you're feeling is anger because that person reminds you of this event, because, I think a lot of kids maybe don't know because they operate from emotions to thoughts. And it's okay, I think, to circle back to, this is what I think caused that emotion, and and then let them respond, obviously.
Yeah. I saw I heard actually it was a really horrible experience for me, and it was a second-hand experience. I was in the at the swimming pool, in the changing room, and there was, in the next cubicle but one, there was a young boy and his dad, and the boy was having a tough time with something. He was really upset, and the dad was going at him with logic, and then I heard him say, "What's wrong with you?"
Yeah.
And it was, it was a couple of weeks ago, and at that time somebody had recommended the Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey book, What Happened to You? And the whole theme of that book is it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you.
Yeah.
And clearly the dad that was asking his son, what's wrong with you, hadn't read the book, like and it was like, it was to me such an example of unconscious parenting. I haven't had the chance to bring it up with somebody, but it feels like the right person feels like time to bring it up with you. So that's at one end of the emotional intelligence spectrum. It's some stressed out dad that's having to handle the logistics of the post swimming pool, post swim in the swimming pool, get the kid changed, and the kid's obviously upset for some reason, and he's lost the calm. There was a real strong edge to his voice, and he'd lost it, poor bloke, and I feel for him.
Yeah.
I lose it sometimes too, right?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So what how does that it seems to me somehow related to making kids feel lovable and they're kind of
Yes.
they're okay despite their emotions.
That is one question I vowed long ago I would never say to my kid, what's wrong with you? There's a big difference between saying what's wrong with you and what's wrong. And, that's what we need to focus on. What's wrong, or what's causing you distress? Tell me, tell me what you're feeling even. Giving them a chance, and it may just be that they're tired and hungry and, they don't know, with a very young child. But I think many children are able to verbalize something that we can't even see. And it may be something simple. I remember riding on an airplane with my young son. I don't know, he was probably 2 or 3, probably, young enough that I had to put his shoes on. He'd taken them off during the flight, and I was putting his shoe on, and he just started screaming. And of course, the flight's ended. You want to get your bags, you want to go. And that's how I felt. What's wrong? Well, I realized that somehow when we had our drinks, an ice cube had fallen into his shoe. And so I'm trying to shove his foot into the shoe with an ice cube that's there. And, it's a very easy fix. But I could have just said, put your shoes on, stop crying, and not dealt with the actual problem. And I think, with adoption or other things, we need to take a moment and say, okay, what is the problem here? What's causing the distress? Might be something very simple, like, something is itching me in my clothes and I'm not going to put these clothes on. Or it might be something very complex, especially for an adopted child. This feels scary. I don't know why this feels scary. I don't want to go to the doctor. I don't want to go wherever you're saying we're going to go, and because it feels scary. And that's how you build trust. You let kids talk through things. And when they're teenagers and they don't want to talk through things, sometimes you really have to make time, let them talk when they want to talk, even if it's at 11 o'clock at night, or, just keep at them somewhat, because, they have to talk to somebody about feelings.
Yeah. I really didn't see the ice cube coming. I thought it was going to be, the air pressure, when we're in a plane and we don't blow our nose to equalize that air pressure, and that hurts. And I thought that's where you're going to go with. And I guess in going back to that the dad and his son in the swimming pool, then that guy's his uncomfort about the situation clearly led to his, his intuition, his ability to read what was going on, because I'm thinking massive gender stereotype, but I'm women are you're more intuitive than us blokes about this stuff, and obviously I'm thinking, like, a mum would have known, my mum would have. I'm guessing my mum would have known that sort of stuff. Should have more likely to have a bit of an idea. But in that time, he had lost it, because his you could tell by the edge of his voice, right? There was a harsh edge to his voice. His anger was at a 7, and he was making a real hard effort to stay logical and calm, and yet it was bleeding. His lack of and again, as I say, I feel this too, right? So no, yeah, I feel this too, and sometimes in the swimming pool for different reasons as well. When like today it's the school holidays. School holidays have just started here in the UK. We're run later than you guys, and it's chaos in the swimming pool because it's just rammed. The swimming pool's rammed. So I'm losing some. I'm getting frustrated because I can't do my laps, right? I can't do my legs. So I'm not saying that I don't fall for this stuff too. I'm not judging this guy. I'm using it as a teaching point, or a discussion point, really. We keep on saying this point. I keep on hearing this more and more from adopted parents. It's about how we are in that moment. In that moment, unfortunately, that dad had lost it, and I lose it too.
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned about getting through the tough stuff, and that kind of what the psychologists call it, self-regulation, don't they? Say,
yeah, I just wrote that word down, regulated.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can't teach our kids to regulate their emotions if we are not able to regulate our own. Which is why it's so wonderful having a spouse. I call them a tag partner, because sometimes when things are just too much for you and you're going to say something you're going to regret, you walk away and you tag the other person and you say, I can't deal with the emotions, the language, whatever is coming out of the child at the moment. But yeah, when you're there by yourself, you have to come up with other ways to regulate. And again, you have to think of these things ahead of time, because if you wait until you're in that situation, you're never going to be able to deal with it how you want to deal with it.
Yeah.
You have to tell yourself, I'm going to walk away. And I've said that to my child many times. I can't talk to you right now. I'm going to go in the other room. I'm going to go outside. I'll be back in 5 minutes. You can do that with older children, or you can tell them, you were just so upset that we can't have a conversation. You need to go somewhere. You can go to your room. You can go outside, a safe place, and we'll come back in 5-10 minutes and see if we can discuss it at that point. So that's one thing that you can do. I think also just having something to hold on to, whether it's a scripture verse or a favorite scene that you have, a quote by somebody, a song. Songs are wonderful. I can't say the number of times I've started singing a song because I had to have something positive in my mind. over the negative that was in front of me. So, those kind of things, but you have to know, what am I going to do when this happens?
Yeah.
And that's so important with adoptive kids, because there's so many landmines that we don't even know are out there, and you step in one and you had no intention of stepping in it, but you did, and something is blowing up, and you need to know ahead of time, what am I going to do?
It's spooky you use the word landmines, because I was talking to somebody yesterday. I'm not sure whether it was for a podcast or just a conversation with somebody. And people use this word trigger. And I said, people use this word trigger. And I said, it's more like a landmine. It is explosive. Trigger just doesn't do it. It doesn't do some of the situations, the most challenging situations, justice. It is, and it is inadvertent, the treading on them. I saw something today in on an adoptee group, an adoptee supporting adoptees group in Facebook, and it made me want to cry with empathy. Well, yeah, made me want to cry, because there was this somebody asking for a tactic to deal with a landmine.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, tactics don't work with landmines. Like, have you what code? It was something like, what coping strategies can you recommend for when I'm feeling totally alone at the end of my tether? And I just thought, you're trying to fight fire with ice here. It's just gonna melt. That doesn't make sense.
Well, it's kind of like triage, right? When you're in a war zone and you have to do some sort of damage control first, and then you can take the person to someplace where they can get more healing or help. But you have to how to know how to stop the bleeding, basically. And I don't know any. I mean, there is no magic formula when you have a child who is completely lost it in front of you, and especially if you were the enemy at that point and things are coming at you. The only way I know to deal with it is just to be quiet, not respond, because a lot of times our responses are not the right responses. Sometimes you just need to let them rant and scream, even if it's at you, which it often is. You don't know what I'm feeling. You did this. You don't want me to be happy, those kind of things. And you can't take them human nature to take them personally, but in that instance, you can't take them personally. You need to kind of set yourself off to the side and just be what's the word I'm looking for? A board, a sounding board. Things can come at you, but they're going to bounce off, because they're not really meant for you. A lot of times the anger is meant for maybe a birth parent or somebody else that hurt them in their past. And I think it's so important as parents, especially adoptive parents, you can't sign up to be a parent or an adoptive parent unless you're willing to take that on. I saw something recently on Facebook, and I don't think this was the original intention. It was a meme, and it showed a father kind of hovering himself over a child, and there were all these arrows in his back, as he was protecting the child, from things from the world coming at them, dangers of the world, whatever. I think that gives such a clear picture, also that, yeah, it hurts to have people, whether they're your children or anyone, yell at you and maybe misrepresent you or say things that aren't true about you. But you have to get through that, because once they have vented, then they can start thinking through things. But when they're in that emotional state, there is no thinking. There is no, the brain cannot think, the whole fight theory, when you're in that moment, you cannot think rationally. And that's something adoptive parents especially have to realize. Your child is not able to process and think at this moment. So you need to get past that moment.
Yeah. I find that kind of the neuro stuff, whenever I listen to a neuro expert person, neuro expert, they just bombard. I just feel bombarded with minutiae of detail. I get completely overwhelmed. I think you know loads of stuff, but can you just strip it down for me?
Yeah.
And one of the big things I learned, I don't know whether it was the Oprah Winfrey book or something else. It explains the landmine, right? Mm. And it's the fact that I think it's the brain stem, the old part of the brain. Mm-hmm. It can't tell the time. So it makes no distinction between what's happening now and what's happened in the past. So that's why there's the explosion of the landmine, because the fear, or the fright or the fury or the insecurity or whatever it is relived.
Yes.
A situation is the same as, is evoking the same feelings as it felt before, and that lower part of the brainstem can't tell the time. And for me, that was one of those rare moments of clarity when I'm listening to a neuro person expert, and I thought, okay, I get that. Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking, as soon as I'm there, I'm looking at your face, I'm thinking, how well did I explain that well? Did that land?
No, I understand and I've gone through trainings on, trauma and the brain, and one of the simplest ways I had it explained to me with regard to landmines was, when there's been trauma, that trauma is like shattered glass, and it goes to every part of the brain. And so something that seems not at all related to the circumstance you're in may trigger, again, we use that word, may trigger an emotion, because trauma has gone everywhere in the brain. And one of the treatments I know that are out there with regard to like post-traumatic stress disorder, whether it's in a Vietnam veteran or a child who's gone through trauma, is to try to get those compartmentalized in your brain so that they don't surprise you at odd times. And so I know there are some treatments out there, the EMDR, there's something called brain spotting, and that's more for kids who don't remember, they weren't old enough maybe to remember trauma. It has been very successful, and what it's supposed to do is, you kind of try to collect that shrapnel that's in your brain and compartmentalize it in an area that you can pull it out and deal with it when you want, not whenever it decides to show up.
Yeah. Makes sense. I had a look at that EMDR stuff for myself, because I'm always open to looking at new things. It didn't. It didn't. For me, it didn't seem. It wasn't explained as eloquently as that, and therefore it didn't appeal. It didn't really appeal to me. But we've got to try whatever it takes. It's like we have to. The next step is the okay. So what we're going to try next, and maybe have a look at EMDR. Maybe have a look at this brain spotting thing. Investigate it and see whether it's right for our kid. I was thinking back to what you said about taking it personally, and I had because I'm a simple guy. I had a distinction. I wrote down a distinction as you were talking, and it was the distinction between don't take it personally, okay, which would be a kind of like an inner critic voice. Now, come on, Simon, don't take it personally, and I'm thinking, well, that hasn't got much power. Right? That hasn't got much power. And I was thinking, and it wouldn't have much power, even if it was internal. It definitely wouldn't have any. It doesn't have any power. If we talk to another adult, saying, well, don't take it personally. As soon as we say something like that to an adult, right? Don't take it personally. And I'm interested to see what you thought of what we say with the kids. Is the adult would definitely turn around and say, I'm not taking it personally. Like, what are you about? There's nothing wrong with me. They would, most adults would take that as a criticism.
Right.
Yeah. So I was thinking, so maybe I ask the first question first. So what do you make of that? I mean,
well, I think between two adults, you're in that spot where you can think, right? You're not in a situation that feels very scary and unsafe. So if someone says, don't take this personally, but I don't like the way you've arranged this graphic or whatever, they are thinking analytically and you are thinking analytically. And you might say, what? I mean, you might think in your mind, I spent 10 hours doing that last night. I am, taking it personally, but you can still think through those things. And okay, what do they want me to change? What is it they don't like? But when you are in a child who is in a moment of, and I don't even know the word, panic, maybe, what's coming out of their mouth, I think it's easier to not take it personally if you realize it's not really directed at you. You know, if they were in their right mind, they would be saying different things, but they're not in their right mind. They are in emotional brainstem, like you said, mind, where they are just feeling things. And so what's coming out of their mouth is not going through their brain. It's just coming out. Just like if somebody were, sick to their stomach and throwing up and, it just happened to not go in on your shoes or something, you're not going to take that personally. It's not that they're meaning to get sick there. That's just where it happened.
That's right.
And so maybe if you look at it kind of that way, that they are not able to process this thought or feeling right now.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And you mentioned the key word. So I was talking about a distinction between don't take it personally, and I'm going to use your word here, right? And a realization that it's not personal.
Yes, that's good. distinction.
It's like, and I'm thinking of the power between those two. So the admonition is maybe a 2 out of 10 in terms of power, or it's power, and I'm talking about its power to its power to reduce the panic. Whereas a realization, it could be a 6 out of 10, it could be a 10 out of 10. The realization, the kind of the insight, the sight from within, the epiphany, the aha moment, whatever we call it, given all the different, using all the different words in case those land better for the listeners. That realization, that seeing things for ourselves, is the one. It's the power that has the change, the power to cause the change. In my opinion, what would you?
Well, the phrase that just came to mind when you were talking is another thing that maybe is not helpful to ask a kid is, what were you thinking? So they make some mistake, can be a very big mistake. And we want to ask them, what were you thinking? And it, if you really thought about it, you would realize they weren't thinking. They acted without thinking. Yeah. And so that's just another thing that's not very helpful. Maybe a better question would be, what was going on at the time, to get a clue as to why they made that choice.
Yeah. As soon as you said that, an idea from a memory from my own past came up, and I was about 10. I've mentioned this a couple of times on the podcast, maybe not recently. So I ran across the road, and I didn't see this little van, like just the size of a small car, like a Golf or something like that, maybe smaller than that, like a little Fiat 500. Do you have those in the States? Those little Fiat 500 things?
No.
Fiat 500. Anyway, a tiny car.
Oh, the Fiats, yes. Fiat. Okay.
So this car knocked me over. It was only doing like 2 miles an hour, 3 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour, and so I fell over. Not me down. And then I told my mum when I got home, and she said something like, what were you thinking, or why did you do that, or and it always sticks out, and I mentioned this. The reason it sticks out because my mum's real empathetic, highly emotionally intelligent woman, right? So it was massively out of character for her to do this. Yeah. But because it was out of character, I remember it, and I remember what was going on in my head. My answer, and I didn't say it to her. I'm pretty sure I didn't say it to her. It is 45 years ago, so maybe I get it wrong. What was in my head was, I didn't do it on purpose.
Right.
So don't make me wrong for something that I didn't do on purpose.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be. Last time I spoke I shared this with somebody. She said, "Oh, well, they could have, brought you, cuddled you up in your arms, and well, I was a 10-year-old kid. I was fairly independent. I was walking, from one bus stop down to another bus stop, like half a mile away, to get a bus 12 miles home. So I was quite an independent. I was in an independent zone, and I wouldn't want my mum to. But what I definitely didn't want, and that wouldn't have worked for me either. But what I definitely didn't like about that was it made me wrong for something that I didn't do on purpose. And I'm thinking, well, and I can't remember another episode of my mum ever being like that to me. But if that had been an everyday occurrence, I would have, it would have been very unsettling.
Yeah, if we could only hear those, because kids will not necessarily say that, especially if they're met with some sort of anger by an adult. They're not going to think I didn't do it on purpose. But that would be a great thing to maybe have in your mind as an adoptive parent for the next time there is some sort of landmine or tantrum, is to think behind all this, maybe my child is saying, I'm not doing this on purpose. I don't want to be, nobody wants to be ranting and raving and lose control of themselves.
Yeah.
And maybe if we put that in our head as we're dealing with children, that would be another way to help us not take it personally.
Yeah.
Your child is not doing this on purpose.
Yeah. Some things just flipped. I'm conscious we're taking a lot of time, taking a lot of your time today. Just want to flip back to something that I didn't really mention earlier on. I was thinking about the the tactic and the triage, and you gave, and I love the tag team tactic, and I think you mentioned something, and I mentioned something. I'm not sure which, but what I was thinking. Okay, so if that's the tactic, what's the strategy, right? What's the long term, big picture thing? And it's what another adoptive mum, Holly Ann Petrie, talked about in one of the other podcasts last year. She came up with this title for her podcast: "Unpacking Our Own Baggage" as adoptive parents. So the short, we need to make a distinction between the short-term tactics and the longer-term strategies. And the longer-term strategies are all have the goal of becoming more self-regulated, so we can be the change that we want to see in our kids. And they're all about becoming more emotionally intelligent, and that's a lifelong learning curve. And if you're still listening, listeners, you are doing it right now. It's about being curious about you're talking about a 16-year, your adoption journey started 16 years, and
Yes.
you're still learning. The learning curve doesn't end.
Correct. Yes. And we all have our own baggage. Even if we have an ideal childhood, there's always baggage, and you need to know, again, what your weaknesses are, or your buttons. As a parent, you tell kids, don't push my buttons. Kids are very good at knowing what those weaknesses are. And so, you have to know yourself.
Yeah.
In what situation am I not going to be able to handle this? Maybe it's not a good idea to schedule this on the same day as we're doing something else, or, because we all have our limits.
Yeah. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes to the Holly Ann episode about unpacking our own baggage. I think that's really useful. What's the question that I've not asked you? Is there one?
Oh, well, I did want to swing it back around to the organization.
Yeah, please.
And obviously, I'm passionate about adoption. There are many millions of kids, around the world in foster care, in orphanages, that need homes. And so that is kind of my passion. And it's interesting because, when we've had such a rough time with my one son, you have the voices in your head saying, gosh, should I really be advocating for this, but that's how important I think it is, that even when it's messy and chaotic and sometimes ugly, there's still such a beauty in adoption and providing a home for a child that otherwise can't, doesn't have anybody to go through all this stuff with. So that's my passion, and we give out adoption grants to families who are in the process of adoption, simply because it is so expensive. And we don't give out large grants. The reason we do it is to encourage, more than anything else, to encourage parents. I had a woman call me yesterday, and she had, her and her husband family had just gotten back from Colombia, had adopted an older teenager, which I, just think is wonderful and commend them. But her husband had just lost his job as soon as they got back. And there wasn't a whole lot of adoption expenses left to pay. And so, the few $100s that were left to pay, I said, we'll pay him. I wish I could do more. And she was just so emotional and grateful. And what she said was, it may not seem like much to you, but you encouraged me today, just by knowing that you want to help.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of why we do what we do, is to come alongside families and provide encouragement. Yep, it's a hard journey to get there. It's a hard journey after you get there, but God is in all the details, and you will get to the next step. So
yeah,
that's where my heart is.
So where can people find out more about
They can go to our website, which is www.be-the-one, spelled out with the number 1 afterwards, .org.
Yeah.
And that will allow them to look at our organization. And if they wanted to apply for a grant, we give out grants in 3 states in the US: Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio. But we would love to talk with people who are contemplating adoption. I know I mentioned before, 30% of people think about it, only 1% actually does adopt, because there are so many questions out there. So we love to educate people as well.
Brilliant. So there'll be a link in the show notes, listeners. There's always links in the show notes to the guests' website and socials where they're available. So I'd encourage you to check them out. And also, if I could ask you, dear listener, share that link on your socials, and maybe the message can land. If it's not appropriate for you right now, maybe it can land for somebody else within your network. Thank you very much, Mary Beth. It's been a fantastic.
Thank you. Can I share one final thought?
Sure, yeah.
Just because I wanted to work this in somehow, but on my website, I have a quote by Winston Churchill, who I really admire him and what he did. But the quote says, "Sometimes it's not enough that we do our best. We have to do what is required." And I just love that quote, because to me, it's encouraging. To say I'm doing my best is sometimes something that keeps us from doing what we know we need to do. So I would just like to encourage your listeners, sometimes there are times in our lives where we have to do what is required, and it does take strength and it does take courage. But there are people out there that will help you with both those things.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mary Beth. And thank you, listeners. We will speak to you very soon. Bye-bye.